I've had a great career, and if I had to do one thing different, I think I would have kept writing. And where I quit writing for years, and just I got lazy about that. I really wasn't inspired to write.
For more than 30 years, George Strait, the man widely regarded as the king of country music, carried a secret deeply close to his heart. Millions of fans around the world admired his flawless career, celebrated his songs, and watched as he performed in packed stadiums, yet few could imagine the weight he bore behind the scenes. While the world saw a polished performer, a devoted husband, and a loving father, what remained hidden was a private life marked by quiet struggles, grief, and the constant effort to protect the people he loved most. Born on May 18, 1952, in the small town of Poteet, Texas, George's upbringing on dusty ranches near Pearl shaped him in ways that formal education could not. The early lessons he learned from the land, from caring for livestock, and from his father, a man who managed ranch work while also teaching mathematics, instilled a unique combination of discipline, resilience, and integrity. George's childhood was not easy, and the challenges he faced during those formative years created the foundation of his character, the backbone that would carry him through decades of public life and private hardship. Music entered his life quietly, slowly embedding itself into his heart through late-night radio and honky-tonk melodies that drifted across the Texas plains. Icons like Hank Williams, Merle Haggard, and George Jones did more than entertain him. They spoke a language he instinctively understood, a language of emotion, longing, and honesty. Unlike his teenage peers, who chased the excitement of rock and roll, George felt a deeper connection to traditional country music, a connection that reflected the authenticity and rawness of the life he knew on the ranch. Music became more than a pastime. It was an emotional compass, a companion through times of struggle, and eventually a calling that he could not ignore. The combination of a demanding childhood, a developing love for music, and the simple, hard lessons of Texas life forged a man who would go on to become a symbol of dedication, loyalty, and artistic integrity, a man who would eventually reveal, decades later, that his greatest struggles were lived in silence. After high school, George Strait's life took a turn that would continue to influence him for the rest of his career. He joined the Army and was stationed in Hawaii during the early 1970s, a placement that exposed him to new experiences while keeping him far from the country music scene in Nashville. While serving, he joined an armed forces band called Ramblin' Country, performing across the islands for military audiences. These experiences were significant, not because they brought fame or recognition, but because they served as early testing grounds for his musical abilities, helping him refine his skills and stage presence in front of real audiences. Upon returning to Texas for college, George's focus on music became sharper and more deliberate. Around this time, he also made one of the most important personal commitments of his life, marrying his high school sweetheart, Norma Voss. Their union, beginning in December 1971 when George was just 19, was unremarkable in the public eye, as fame had yet to touch them, but it was remarkable in its emotional depth and authenticity. The couple navigated the early years of marriage, parenthood, and career uncertainty together, a period that tested both their love and resilience. Their daughter Jennifer arrived in 1972, bringing joy but also immense responsibility to a young George who was simultaneously managing military duties and pursuing musical ambitions. Life was challenging, and every day required effort, perseverance, and mutual support. Norma's unwavering presence and quiet strength allowed George to pursue his dreams while maintaining the stability of their family life. This early period of George Strait's life demonstrates a remarkable balance between ambition and personal responsibility, a balance that would be repeatedly tested as fame and tragedy entered their world. Tragedy struck the Strait family in the summer of 1986, changing the trajectory of George's life forever. On June 25th, his 13-year-old daughter Jennifer was tragically killed in a car accident in San Marcos, Texas. The loss was instantaneous, heartbreaking, and unimaginable for any parent, yet George and Norma faced it with the same stoicism and dignity that had marked their lives up to that point. Jennifer was more than a child. She was the central figure around which the family's love and stability revolved. Her death created a void so profound that words could scarcely capture the magnitude of grief experienced by her parents. In the aftermath, George Strait withdrew from public attention, declining interviews and avoiding personal questions from the media. While some may have interpreted this as aloofness or indifference, it was instead a deliberate act of protection for himself, for Norma, and for the memory of Jennifer. The world demanded access, explanations, and vulnerability, but George chose to keep the grief of his family private. Music remained his outlet, but even then, he rarely spoke of Jennifer directly, allowing the emotions to flow subtly through his performances rather than explicit confessions. This approach transformed his artistry, lending a depth and authenticity that resonated with audiences, even if they did not understand the source of his restraint. By choosing privacy over public sympathy, George demonstrated a quiet strength and an unwavering commitment to those he loved. From this point forward, George Strait's life reflected a duality: a celebrated public figure and a private man shaped by profound loss. The couple established the Jennifer Lynn Strait Foundation in 1987, dedicating themselves to helping children facing illness, hardship, and instability. This initiative was not motivated by publicity, but by a desire to honor Jennifer's memory through positive action. The foundation operated quietly, focusing on impact rather than recognition, and over the years raised millions for children's causes in Texas and beyond. Meanwhile, George's career continued to thrive, yet his dedication to family and his values remained uncompromised. He limited media appearances, avoided tabloid culture, and maintained a steadfast boundary between public life and private grief. Over time, this approach created a sense of mystique around him, as fans began to respect his commitment to authenticity and the integrity of his private life. His marriage to Norma remained strong. Their children grew up shielded from celebrity pressures, and George's music became a testament to resilience rather than spectacle. In every concert, every album, and every note, audiences could sense the depth of emotion behind the performance, even if the exact reasons remained unknown. This balance between public achievement and private strength became George Strait's defining characteristic, a blueprint for navigating fame without compromising personal values. In April 2009, George Strait faced yet another blow that tested his resilience and reinforced the private nature of his life. His older brother, John "Buddy" Strait, passed away at the age of 58. For George, Buddy was far more than a sibling. He was a connection to the man George had been before fame altered the contours of his life. Growing up together on the Texas ranches, the two brothers had shared the same struggles, the same hard lessons, and the same dreams. Buddy had known George when he was just another boy with a guitar and a passion for music, unburdened by the pressures of stadium tours, record deals, or the eyes of the world. Losing Buddy was not just losing family, it was losing one of the last links to his earliest self, the person who had witnessed him before life began rewriting his story in headlines and charts. True to the pattern George had established after Jennifer's death, he processed this loss in private. There were no public statements, no interviews detailing his grief, and no social media posts attempting to explain the depth of what he felt. Those who knew him recognized the familiar behavior: retreat, reflection, and protection. It was a deliberate choice to allow grief to exist without spectators, to honor the depth of his emotions without making them performative. The entertainment industry often expects vulnerability on demand, but George had learned that authentic emotions, particularly grief, do not require an audience to be legitimate. His silence became, once again, a shield, not a withdrawal from humanity, but a careful guarding of what mattered most. While fans speculated about his private life and career decisions, George understood the value of boundaries, the necessity of keeping certain things sacred, and the strength that comes from resisting external pressure to expose personal suffering. Buddy's death reinforced this principle. George chose to let music carry the emotional weight rather than explanations, allowing every performance, every note, and every pause to reflect experiences too profound for words. By continuing to balance his career with an unshakable commitment to privacy, George Strait solidified his reputation not only as a country music legend, but as a man of integrity, proving that dignity often requires quiet resilience rather than public display. As George Strait's career continued to flourish, he faced yet another form of loss that few outsiders could understand. In 2024, three men who had been his constant companions for decades passed away within a short span of time. Gene Elders, his longtime fiddle player, and Irv Ozoff, his legendary manager, both died on March 20th, 2024. Weeks later, on April 29th, Tom Foote, his trusted road manager, also passed away. Each of these men played an irreplaceable role in George's life and career. Irv had guided George's journey from near obscurity to international stardom, protecting his values while navigating the treacherous waters of fame. Gene's fiddle work defined the sound that became synonymous with George's live performances, creating moments that fans would remember forever. Tom ensured that the behind-the-scenes machinery of touring operated seamlessly, allowing George to focus entirely on the music and the audience. Losing all three in such a short period was not just an operational setback, it was a profound emotional loss. These men were more than colleagues. They were brothers forged through long nights, endless miles on the road, and the intimacy of shared experiences. Their absence left emotional and practical gaps that could never be filled by replacements. George responded as he always had, quietly, with dignity and reflection. His 2024 album, Cowboys and Dreamers, became a tribute to their memory, not in spectacle or headline-grabbing statements, but in music that carried the emotions of gratitude, love, and remembrance. Every song, every chord, and every note reflected the depth of relationships that had shaped his journey. By channeling grief into creative work rather than public mourning, George continued to demonstrate the principles that had guided him for decades: respect for privacy, reverence for relationships, and the belief that love and loss are best honored through action rather than spectacle. This period in George's life illustrates a recurring theme. His public accomplishments were inseparable from the private bonds he maintained, the people who supported him quietly, and the losses that he endured with remarkable restraint. The music became not just entertainment, but a vessel for processing life, a silent confession carried to the ears and hearts of millions who never knew the full story behind the songs. In April 2025, George Strait faced yet another devastating chapter in his life when his closest friend of over 40 years, Roy Superlooper Cooper, died tragically in a house fire. Roy's death was not simply the passing of a friend, it was the loss of a brother in every sense that mattered. Their relationship had been forged not by blood, but by shared values, mutual respect, and decades of loyalty. Both men were products of the same Western culture, understanding the dignity of hard work, the importance of humility, and the meaning of integrity. Roy's legendary rodeo career never inflated his ego, a trait George deeply admired, and their friendship had grown stronger over years of shared experiences, on the road and in life. When Roy passed, George's response, as always, reflected the private man he had become. At the funeral, George delivered a tribute so raw and heartfelt that his voice reportedly trembled throughout, revealing depths of emotion rarely displayed in public. He spoke of decades of laughter, loyalty, and shared understanding, honoring a life and friendship that had profoundly influenced him. This loss, coming on the heels of prior griefs, reopened every wound from earlier tragedies, the deaths of Jennifer, Buddy, Gene, Irv, and Tom. Yet even in the midst of profound sorrow, George's focus remained on gratitude rather than bitterness, celebrating the lives of those who had shaped him rather than lamenting their absence. Once again, his private resilience became a public lesson that dignity, love, and loyalty often exist far from the spotlight, and that the most powerful human experiences are not always shared with the world. Through it all, George Strait continued to perform, to create music, and to honor the people who had walked beside him, demonstrating that true strength is measured not by public display, but by the quiet courage to endure, to love, and to remember. For George Strait, music was never just a career or a source of fame. It was a mirror reflecting the deepest experiences of his private life. While fans cheered in packed stadiums, few understood that behind each song, behind each chord and melody, there lay years of personal trials and grief carefully carried in silence. From the earliest days of his career, George's connection to traditional country music went beyond simple admiration. It was a lifeline, a way to make sense of the world and the hardships that came with it. The death of his daughter Jennifer, the loss of his brother Buddy, and the passing of close friends and collaborators created layers of emotion that could not be expressed casually in interviews or magazine features. Instead, George channeled that pain into his music, allowing the subtle nuances of tone, phrasing, and timing to carry the weight of experiences too intimate to verbalize. Listeners might not have known the exact causes of the emotion in a performance, yet they felt its authenticity in every note, in every pause, in the restraint that marked George's style. This ability to convey profound human feeling without exposition became a defining characteristic of his artistry. Songs like Amarillo by Morning or I Cross My Heart resonated far beyond catchy lyrics. They became vessels for shared human experience, offering solace to anyone who had endured loss, hardship, or longing. In this way, George Strait's music served a dual purpose. It entertained and captivated millions, while simultaneously functioning as a private emotional outlet, allowing him to honor the lives and memories of those he had loved and lost. Over time, this approach shaped not only his music but also his public persona. Fans admired his consistency, his humility, and the integrity of his performances, all without needing to know the personal tragedies that influenced them. The music became a silent testimony to resilience, proving that creativity and emotional depth often flourish most when nurtured in private, away from public scrutiny. In essence, George Strait's songs became a bridge between his personal life and the audience, a connection built on authenticity, subtlety, and the quiet power of human experience. One of the most remarkable aspects of George Strait's life is the balance he maintained between extraordinary fame and steadfast commitment to family and privacy. Unlike many celebrities, who are compelled to broadcast every personal moment to maintain relevance or publicity, George consistently drew boundaries that protected his loved ones and preserved his sense of self. His wife, Norma, remained firmly out of the spotlight, supporting George quietly while raising their children, Jennifer and Bubba, away from the pressures of fame. Even as George's career soared and stadiums replaced honky-donks, he resisted the temptation to trade private tragedy for public sympathy. The choices he made in his personal life, dinners at home instead of Hollywood parties, family milestones kept private, and the decision to speak through music rather than media, reinforced a philosophy that placed values and integrity above recognition or acclaim. This discipline was not easy. Country music thrives on personality, on sharing life stories alongside songs, and fans naturally wanted to understand the man behind the voice. Yet George consistently refused to expose his family to the glare of public attention, making peace with disappointing strangers in order to honor what mattered most to him. The discipline required for such restraint is often underestimated. Maintaining boundaries over decades in an industry that rewards exposure demanded not only emotional fortitude, but also